Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Part 2, Chapter 6, Part 1. Subsection 1. "It's not going to leave off," said Neville despairingly, drumming with his fingers on the window pane and looking out upon the little gardens below the flat. The rain was falling heavily like rods from a dreary sky. He had lunched with the Bessingtons before going down to Ranelagh, as had been arranged, with Lord Maresfield, who was to call for them at 2:30 and be taken down in Neville's car. But the rain had set in with thunder about 11, and it had rained steadily ever since. It did not seem probable that there would be polo this afternoon. "Don't be so dismal, please," said Enid from her chair. They had had a delightful lunch. Mrs. Bessington had managed her conversation quite tolerably, had made an excuse to go away as soon as coffee had come in, and had not returned. Neville understood that she was making preparations of a private and intimate nature, probably domestic. Enid had been as charming as ever since Saturday. She appeared entirely to have forgotten the very small misunderstanding they had somehow stumbled into, and it was now Wednesday. But it was Neville now who felt himself at fault. He felt clumsy and awkward and rather gross, and he could not think why. He had never been particularly aware of these shortcomings before. He supposed it was that he had never before been on these intimate and tender terms with a woman. He had begun, too, more than ever now, to think that it really must have been himself who was to blame for the incident of last Saturday. He had been imperceptive, he told himself. He had jarred, somehow, on the fine femininity of the girl, and, above all, he had been a great deal too quick, during his little lonely walk in the park, to put the blame upon her and to see significance in what was insignificant. He had done her an injustice. He must take care to do her more than justice now, to make up. "I'm sorry," he said, with a genial frankness. "I know I'm dismal. I hate being put off." "What are you looking at?" She held up a magazine and then laid it aside. Again he felt clumsy. He had interrupted her. "No, go on reading," he said. "I'll look at the rain. Perhaps it'll stop if I look hard enough. Like a watched pot, you know?" He turned again to the window and began to ruminate. Now, down at Hartley, he would go and play tennis with a marker on such a day as this. Here there was really nothing whatever to do. Of course, there was a court at Prince's, but Enid wouldn't care to go merely to watch him. Besides, the court would certainly be taken. He was a discontented brute, he told himself. Yet he really did not know what to suggest. He would have been simply delighted to sit here with Enid, or to go to any form of entertainment that she wished. Honestly, he asked nothing better. He loved to watch her, to talk of nothing in particular, merely to be with her. But he felt she wanted something else, and he did not know what this was. He could not have believed 6 months ago that any human woman could so engage his attention, could so identify herself with him, that he judged of things from her view rather than from his own. He did not say any more, "What should I like?" but, "What should we like?" In fact, it was very nearly, if not quite, "What would she like?" The telephone bell tinkled in the little hall outside, and he turned round. Enid had not taken up the magazine again, and seemed ruminating too. Again he felt himself a brute. She had laid aside the magazine in order to be talked to, and he had not spoken. But she smiled naturally at him. "Do go and see, there's a good boy." He went obediently out. "It's Maresfield," he said when he came back. "He says that he's certain there'll be no polo, what? And that the thing had better be off, eh?" She smiled, but he felt he had been a little untactful in imitating her friend. "Yes, I suppose so," she said. "Just tell him so, won't you? and then we'll see what's to be done." An idea had come to him, and he proposed it as soon as he returned. "What about the zoo?" he asked. "I haven't been there since I took Jim. Let's go and be ridiculous." Her forehead wrinkled slightly. "Oh, do you think? In the rain?" What an ass he was! Of course, the rain! "Well, I give up. What a desolate hole London is." He sat down for about the 5th time since lunch, seeing that he had said what he should not. Since he was in London simply because she was there. Again she smiled, but he felt he had wounded her again. How extraordinarily clumsy he was. Yet he used not to feel so with her. He had been even less careful than he was now trying to be, and yet somehow he had not said so many unfortunate things as he was saying now, in spite of his anxiety. Then he yawned. She looked at him, and then humour broke out all over her face. "You're being quite impossible," she said. "First you don't talk, then you imitate that poor dear man, then you say London's a desolate hole, and then you yawn in my face. Neville, wake up!" She said it so genially that the shadow went from his mind. It was not till a little later that it occurred to him how rapidly she had narrated his blunders. "I know," he said, "but what's to be done?" "What about a matinee?" "My dear girl, anything in the world you like, but I quite understand, yes, we have been a good deal. Well, it's your turn." "Let's get into a car and drive, and then come home again to tea. We've got that beastly crush this evening, you know." She stood up. "Neville, that's perfect. You'll drive, won't you? And yes, that's perfect." Subsection 2. In 10 minutes she was back again, muffled up in a suitable manner. He put the difficulty that had occurred to him as soon as she had left the room. "But what about your mother?" he said. "Oh, Mother won't come," she said lightly. "I saw her just now. Come on, Neville, this is going to be lovely." The car was already there, hooded against the rain, and Paul was waiting in the hall of the flat. "We aren't going to Ranelagh," said Neville. "You'll have to go inside, Paul. Miss Bessington will sit with me." Ah, this thought had been an inspiration. This was exactly what he wanted. He really had had more than enough of the inside of theatres and galleries and houses. It was that was the matter with him, and that had put him slightly on edge. It was the open air and room to breathe and a sense of space that he needed, and that she needed too. "Now this is really nice," she said, as he finished tucking her in on the side nearest to himself, and as Paul went round in front to wind up the machine. "We'll just drive and come back to tea, as you said. Neville, you're a genius. And I've never sat by you before while you drove. Where shall we go?" He proposed a route. They would start to the north, go as far as the time allowed, wheel westwards, and then come back by Roehampton and Barnes and Hammersmith. "That'll be lovely," she said contentedly. Oh, but this was delicious to Neville. There they sat, these two, in the world and simultaneously entirely out of it. The world streamed past them. First the crowded streets, then a scrap of open ground, then streets again, and at last would come the open country. They could observe and talk, shut in here, not only from the rain and the desolation outside, but from that pressing, talking world that had so crushed upon the nerves of them both. It was as if Frascati itself, or the seat by the horse's monument at Hartley, were translated into other terms. She was close beside him, that extraordinarily sweet presence, her face turned a little towards him, nestling in its hood. He saw it now and again when he could take his eyes off the road, but he was aware of it all the time. Moreover, their talking could be of the right sort. Each could speak when inclined, or be silent, that very essential secret of comradeship. It was all exactly right. "Oh, take care of that old man," she said suddenly as they whisked up by the side of the park railings. He was a first-rate example of the type aboard of motorists' souls. He came out suddenly, 30 yards ahead, looking the wrong way. He set himself, with an open umbrella over his shoulder, with his back to them, irresolute, watching the opposite stream of vehicles with a view, it appeared, to crossing. Neville set his teeth and turned the wheel a little, first sounding his horn, but the old gentleman paid no attention. 5 seconds later, the car whisked by the old gentleman, sounding its horn suddenly again as it came opposite him, so soon as it was quite clear that he was perfectly safe. Enid caught an anguished face of terror. "That'll teach him," said Neville. "Those are the real road hogs after all." Enid laughed softly. "You're a little hard on him," she said. "Not at all. We really have some right to the road, you know." "You do drive splendidly," she said, as Neville, after an anxious second or two at the Marble Arch, nipped in front of a heavy dray, whose driver was obviously trying to incommode him. "And that's another lesson," said Neville. "What philanthropists we are!" So they talked easily, with silences, until, after leaving Edgware when the open country was certain, he turned to her. "Now, talk to me gently," he said, "and I'll put in comments." "About what?" "About anything in the world that you like." She was silent for perhaps 50 yards. "Well, I'll tell you what I want," she said. "Oh, Neville, this is delicious." "Go on," he said, and his own heart warmed at her words. Then she began, and talked slowly and meditatively, with pauses. "First of all," she said, "I want to live at Hartley forever and ever. That's essential. Then, I hardly ever want any guests. I want to feel that it's all mine, and yours, of course. I want to be able to walk about the garden without being interrupted. In summer, I want all the windows opened wide all the time, and in winter, I want all the curtains drawn and the shutters shut just before it gets quite dark. I think I want to go abroad about once in 2 years. At least, I think we ought to. Or we may just possibly get stuffy." "In spite of the open windows?" "In spite of the open windows," she repeated gravely. "And I think, in the other years, we ought to come up to the desolate hole called London, for about a month, not more, for the same reason. Yes, I know that's very sensible and improving of me, but I can't help it." "About guests. Yes, I do want guests, one at a time, first a man and then a woman, and so on, alternately. I'll ask the women and you shall ask the men, but not too many." "No married people?" "No," she said firmly. "And each of us is responsible for his own guest and must look after him. You can go down and bathe, or whatever it is, with your man, and I can sit out in the pavilion and talk life and being with my woman, or drive in a little pony carriage with a fat pony. Neville, I must have a fat pony. And then I can go and call on the clergyman's wife now and then." "There'll be no difficulty about that, I should think. And we must have Aunt Anna, you know." "Why, of course, that's understood." "And your mother?" "Of course again," said Enid. There was a very short pause before she began again. "I shall wear nice clothes at Hartley. I think that's important. Neville, have you got to do many county things?" "Oh, now and then." "Yes, I suppose so. And I suppose I must too. What a pity! How very much nicer it would be not to do any of them. Neville?" "Yes?" "Does Father Richardson really interrupt much?" "My dear, he's got to be there, you know. Or someone else." "Yes, I suppose so. Oh, dear me." "What's the matter?" How heavenly it would be if we really could do exactly as we wanted, without any conventions at all. What do you want?" "I want exactly what you do." "But how nice of you! And there's really no chance at all of getting rid of Father Richardson?" "It's like this," said Neville. "Hartley is a Catholic place. It's been so always. There's always been a chapel there, which serves as a parish church, and where there's a chapel, there must be a chaplain. I suppose I could build a church in the village instead, but it would be frightfully inconvenient for everybody else, and I can't think what people would say." "Does that matter?" "I think it does, rather. You see, Hartley, the house itself, has always been a centre." "I see," said Enid. "Go on about other things," said Neville. "We'll talk about Father Richardson later. Perhaps we could manage something." So she went on, after another inconsiderable pause, describing in a delightful and inconsequent way, as if they were the dreams of a child, all the things that she wanted to do, and Neville's heart again warmed and kindled to hear how she wanted a small walled garden down by the bridge, where she could sit entirely alone, to which she and Neville alone had the key, and as an afterthought, the gardener too, when Neville reminded her of the necessity, and a room at the top of the house, to which she alone had the key. Neville might have another room like it, if he wished, under parallel conditions. For he found in her again, as she talked, exactly the same mood and aspect in which he had first learned to love her. That strange and arresting love of solitude which he, too, secretly understood. That particular kind of attitude to the world of which they had spoken at Frascati, with the Campagna spread beneath them and the white line of Rome on the hazy horizon. He really had had some bad moments since Saturday, when he had actually almost believed that she was not quite what he had thought her. A belief which he had veiled to himself by saying that she had nerves. Moments when she seemed not indeed like other people after all, for evidently she was unique, but to possess characteristics of other people which he had not imagined her to possess. But those moments were gone now, once and for all, and the balance was restored. He knew now that he had been right at first, that all the comradeship was there, just as he had thought, that she was not only the woman that he loved, but, what does not always follow, the woman that he understood. So peace came back, and he was as happy as ever.